My alien roommate walked in on me. Now she thinks we're mated for life. The silence in the apartment was the color of chrome. It was a polished, sterile absence of sound that coated every surface in the shared habitation unit assigned to junior attaché Jared Renner and his Sverin roommate. Here on the citadel of 1,000 worlds, efficiency was the dominant aesthetic, leaving no room for the comfortable clutter of life. It was all seamless white alloy, auto-sanitizing surfaces, and nutrient paste dispensers that hummed with a quiet, judgmental efficiency. Jared hated it. He hated the way the air scrubbers stole every familiar scent and the way the programmable light mimicked a sun he hadn't seen in 2 years. Tonight, the ache of that sterile existence was a physical weight in his chest. It was a profound and crushing homesickness for texture, for chaos, for the simple, messy reality of being human. He needed to make something with his hands. He needed to feel something real. From the false bottom of his transport locker, he retrieved the contraband. Not weapons or illicit data chips, but something far more precious. A bag of all-purpose flour, a packet of dried yeast, and a small, rough sack of sea salt. Smuggled luxuries that were worthless to anyone else in this quadrant. To him, they were salvation. He worked at the small food prep station, a pristine surface that had likely never seen anything more complex than a nutrient cartridge. He measured the warm water with a trembling precision, his reflection a distorted mask in the chrome basin. The face that looked back was tired. Dark, close-cropped hair, a beard that was neatly trimmed but couldn't hide the tension in his jaw. His eyes were focused, but the light in them was low. He poured the yeast into the water, watching the dormant granules swirl and awaken. The faint, earthy smell that rose from the mixture was the first honest scent this apartment had ever known. Jared mixed the flour and salt in a bowl, then made a well in the center. He poured in the yeast mixture. The moment his fingers sank into the slurry, a shudder of relief went through him. The sticky, clumsy texture was a balm to his soul. He worked the dough on the countertop, a surface he'd meticulously cleaned, and then ignored the sanitization warning for. He pushed and folded, a rhythm taking over his body. His shoulders, usually tight with diplomatic tension, began to loosen. Flour dusted his black shirt and settled on his neck and arms. A fine white powder coated his beard. He was no longer a diplomat. He was just a man, engaged in an act of creation so ancient it was encoded in his DNA. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the dough came together, a smooth, elastic sphere of potential. He placed it in the bowl, covered it, and let it rise in a corner of the apartment where the temperature was warmest. An hour later, it had doubled in size. He punched it down, the soft explosion of air a satisfying sigh. He shaped the loaf, his hands moving with an inherited memory, and slid it into the high-temperature heating unit, a device normally used for flash sterilizing equipment. He leaned against the counter, chest heaving, a real triumphant smile finally reaching his eyes. The smell began to fill the space, a rich, warm, and utterly human aroma that was an act of rebellion in this sterile world. It was the scent of home. When the unit chimed, he pulled the loaf out. It was perfect, a deep golden brown crust, a hollow sound when he tapped its bottom. He held it in his hands, a tangible piece of his past, and in that moment of pure, unadulterated joy, the apartment door slid open. Mykaela stood silhouetted in the doorway, her form a paradigm of Sverin grace. Her severe black bangs cut a perfect line across her brow, drawing attention to her wide, luminous violet eyes. She had been in a prolonged session with her father's diplomatic corps, a 12-hour ordeal of reviewing trade clauses that left the mind scoured and weary. She had anticipated returning to the familiar, silent chrome of her apartment. She was prepared for the scentless, recycled air and the cool, logical peace. She was not prepared for this. The air was thick. It was heavy with a complex, overwhelming aroma that her Sverin senses struggled to parse. It was warm, savory, and organic. It was the smell of a chemical reaction she had no name for, and it was everywhere. Her gaze swept the room and landed on Jared. He stood in the center of the food prep area, illuminated by the warm light of the open heating unit. His shirt was smudged with a fine white powder that also clung to his dark beard and the skin of his neck. His face was flushed with exertion, and a sheen of moisture covered his brow. In his hands, He held a rough, browned object from which steam was rising in gentle curls. He looked primal, triumphant, and utterly alien. Then, her genetically ingrained training, the deep cultural knowledge drilled into every highborn Sverin, took over. Her mind filtered the chaotic data through the lens of her heritage, searching for a pattern, a precedent. It found one, an ancient one from a time before nutrient paste and synthetic sustenance, a time when Sverin society was forged. She saw the flushed skin not as exertion, but as a display of vitality. The powder on his body was not a mess, but a ritual dusting. The object in his hands was not just food, it was provision, created from base elements through physical labor, an offering of life, of sustenance, of future. Her mind supplied the name, a phrase spoken only in the most sacred of texts, the rite of provision. The shock was a physical blow. It bypassed her logical mind and struck something deeper, something dormant in her DNA. The network of bioluminescent filaments beneath her skin, usually invisible, ignited. A brilliant, pulsating web of ethereal blue light flared across her cheekbones, climbed her temples, and traced the elegant line of her jaw and neck. It was an involuntary, uncontrollable response to a stimulus of the highest possible significance. It was the Sverin equivalent of a human heart stopping in their chest. Behind her, her aide, a young Sverin male named Leon, let out a sharp, audible gasp. The sound broke the spell. Jared's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by confusion as he stared at the glowing patterns now illuminating her face. Mykaela took a single deliberate step into the room. Her voice, when it came, was a faint tremor in the warm, fragrant air. "I accept," she said. The bottom fell out of Jared's world. Leon, the aide, simply bowed his head, his duty clear. He had been a witness. The compact was sealed. The summons came less than an hour later. Jared was escorted not to the human delegation's offices, but to the Severin ambassadorial suite, a cavernous space that managed to be both opulent and intimidating. The air was cool and smelled of polished metal and something vaguely floral that he knew was an atmospheric additive designed to calm most carbon-based life forms. It was not working. He stood in the center of the room, feeling small and foolishly human. Before him sat Ambassador Kalen, Mykaela's father. The ambassador was a portrait of Sverin nobility, his features sharp and intelligent, his posture radiating an authority that needed no preamble. The bioluminescent patterns on his face were dormant, a sign of perfect emotional control. To his right sat Jared's own superior, Director Evelyn Reed, whose expression was a tight, unreadable mask of damage control. And to the ambassador's left sat Mykaela. She was a statue carved from moonlight and shadows, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Jared's shoulder. The soft, steady blue glow had not left her skin. It was a constant, silent testament to the event that had transpired. "Mr. Renner," Ambassador Kalen began, his voice a low, resonant baritone that filled the space. "I have been appraised of the evening's developments. Your declaration to my daughter was, I am told, unconventional, but it was witnessed, and it was accepted." Jared opened his mouth, a frantic denial on his lips. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Kalen's eyebrow arched, a minute gesture that carried immense weight. "The right of provision is not a concept open to interpretation. It is the oldest, most foundational compact of our people. A male of status provides, a female of status accepts. It signifies the creation of a household, a union of lineages. It has not been performed in its primal form for 500 years, but it is a law that has never been rescinded." Director Reed finally spoke, her voice strained. "Jared, perhaps you could explain your actions." "I was baking," Jared said, the words sounding absurd even to him. "I was baking bread. It's a human food, a tradition." Ambassador Kalen tilted his head. "You created sustenance from base elements with your own hands. You presented this provision in your shared habitation. My daughter, the highest-ranking unmarried female of my house, was the first to see it. The symbolism is absolute, Mr. Renner. To Sverin law, the intent is secondary to the action and its witness." The trap was closing. He could feel its steel teeth. "To retract a witness declaration," the ambassador continued, his voice losing its placid edge, "is to declare the offering corrupt. It is to name the recipient, and by extension her entire house, as unworthy. It is an accusation of such profound insult that it would dissolve the human sovereign treaty before the sun sets on this citadel. It would be seen as a deliberate act of political sabotage, an act of war. The last 3 words hung in the air, cold and heavy as lead. Jared looked from the implacable ambassador to his own director's grim face. Then his eyes met Mykaela's. For the first time she looked directly at him. Her violet eyes were wide, and in their depths he saw not triumph or anger, but a deep and unnerving certainty. The blue light on her skin seemed to pulse in time with his own frantic heartbeat. He was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. Their first public appearance as a bonded couple was at a gala celebrating the renewal of a mining charter with the gelatinous Rigelian hegemony. The ballroom was a dizzying panorama of alien biology and political maneuvering. Beings of light conversed with silicon-based life forms while delegation heads traded veiled threats over glasses of bubbling, exotic liquids. For Jared, it was a special kind of hell. He felt like a fraud in a suit that was suddenly too tight, with a partner who was both a stranger and, according to galactic law, his life mate. Mykaela moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, a stark contrast to his own rigid discomfort. She was a vision in a simple, dark blue gown that left her shoulders and neck bare, showcasing the soft, constant glow of her bioluminescent patterns. To the other aliens, it was a fascinating curiosity. To the few Sverren present, it was a public declaration of her new status, and they gave her a wide, respectful berth. "You are broadcasting your anxiety," she murmured, her voice close to his ear as she guided him toward a less crowded alcove. "Your posture is defensive. A bonded pair should reflect harmony." "Sorry," Jared ground out. "I'm a little new to the whole suddenly mated for life because of a carbohydrate thing." A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, passed through her eyes. The blue light on her cheeks deepened for a second. The rite was not about the provision itself, but the act of creation. To trivialize it is an insult. "I'm not trying to insult you, Mykaela. I'm just trying to breathe." Before she could respond, a smooth, cultured voice interrupted them. "Ah, the celebrated couple. Ambassador Kaelin's pride is the talk of the Citadel." It was Administrator Valerius, a Tolian diplomat whose species resembled polished obsidian statues. Valerius was a primary rival to both the Sverren and human delegations, known for his honeyed words and venomous political tactics. He offered a slight, condescending bow. "I must confess, your union took us all by surprise. A human embracing our more ancient traditions. How wonderfully novel." His eyes glittered, scanning them both. "Tell me, Attaché Renner, what part of our culture inspired such a profound declaration? Was it the sanctity of lineage? The permanence of the bond?" Jared's mind went blank. He was a diplomat, trained for this, but the sheer absurdity of his position had short-circuited his brain. Mykaela stepped slightly in front of him, a subtle but protective gesture. "The administrator knows well that the nature of a bond is a private matter, Valerius," she said, her tone icy. "To inquire further would be a breach of protocol." Valerius's thin lips curved into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Of course, Lady Mykaela, my apologies. I am simply fascinated by such passion. It will be an asset, I am sure, or a liability." He gave another shallow bow and glided away, leaving a chill in his wake. Jared watched him go, a knot tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just about him and Mykaela anymore. Their bond was now a piece on a political game board, and they were the most vulnerable players. The moment the apartment door slid shut behind them, the fragile truce of the gala shattered. Jared paced the length of the chrome living area, yanking at the collar of his uniform. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the sound of his angry footsteps. "This is a disaster," he finally burst out, turning to face her. "Did you see him? Valerius was sniffing for weakness. He knows something is wrong. We're a liability, a joke." Mykaela stood perfectly still by the door, her hands clasped behind her back. The blue glow on her skin was brighter now, pulsing with a nervous, agitated rhythm that mirrored the frantic energy radiating from him. "We showed a united front." His inquiries were deflected. "For how long?" Jared shot back, his voice rising. He gestured wildly with his hands. How long until everyone figures out this whole thing is built on a lie? It was bread, Mykaela, flour and water and yeast. It means nothing. The light on her face flared, a sharp, brilliant flash of sapphire. I told you not to trivialize it. Her voice was sharp, cracking through her composure like breaking glass. It was the first time he had ever heard her raise it. Why? He demanded, stepping closer. Why are you defending this? You're as trapped as I am. You could end this. You could tell your father the truth, that you misinterpreted the situation. There was nothing to misinterpret, she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. Her violet eyes locked onto his, and he saw a strange mix of frustration and vulnerability in them. The rite was performed. The law is the law. To hell with the law. This is our lives. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough to feel the faint warmth her body gave off. There has to be a way out. Unless you don't want one. Is this what you wanted? A convenient bond without the mess of actual Severan courtship? Her expression hardened, but the frantic light on her skin betrayed her. You think my life is one of convenience? I am a political asset, Jared. My bond was to be a strategic alliance, negotiated over years. You have single-handedly destroyed a decade of my father's planning. Then help me fix it, he pleaded, his anger giving way to desperation. Just admit it was a mistake. I cannot. The words were barely audible. Why? Mykaela closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, the anger was gone, replaced by a profound, weary resignation that startled him. Because the rite is not just a ceremony, it's biological. She took a shallow breath. It awakens a dormant trait in Severan females of my lineage, a sensitivity, an empathetic link. Jared stared at her, uncomprehending. A what? It is one way. I cannot read your thoughts, but I can feel the edges of your emotions. Her gaze was unflinching. At the gala, I felt your anxiety as if it were a cold draft on my skin. When Valerius approached, I felt your fear. And just now, your anger is like a loud, dissonant noise in this room. She paused, and the blue glow on her cheeks softened into something more complex, more confused. And beneath it all, there is something else, a hum, an attraction. It is faint, but it is there. She looked at him, her regal composure gone, leaving only a woman grappling with a reality she couldn't escape. So you see, it does not matter what you intended. The link has formed. It is part of my physiology now. I can feel that you are not lying to me, but I can also feel the bond. For me, Jared, it is already real. Jared didn't sleep. He sat in the chrome silence of the apartment long after Mykaela had retreated to her room, her revelation echoing in the sterile air. An empathetic link. She could feel him. The thought was violating, terrifying, and in a strange, unwelcome way, deeply intimate. His frustration wasn't just his own anymore. It was a dissonant noise that affected her. His anxiety was a cold draft on her skin. He had spent 2 years on the Citadel feeling utterly alone, and now he learned he had a silent passenger to his most private emotional landscape. His anger had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, complicated guilt. He had done this to her. His selfish need for a taste of home had shackled her with a biological and political chain. The situation was no longer a lie he had to maintain for political reasons. It was a truth he had to navigate for her sake. The next evening, he found her in the common area reviewing a data slate. The soft blue patterns on her skin were calm, a gentle, ambient glow. He walked to the central console without a word and keyed in a command. A moment later, music filled the apartment. It wasn't the sterile, mathematically perfect compositions favored by the Severan. It was old earth music, a recording so ancient it was full of pops and hisses. A lone cello playing Bach. The notes were complex, a tapestry of sorrow, longing, and a stubborn, resilient joy. It was chaotic, emotional, and unapologetically human. Mykaela looked up from her slate, her head tilted. Her expression was one of polite confusion, but the light on her skin began to change. As the cello descended into a deep, melancholic passage, the blue glow on her cheeks softened and swirled, deepening to an indigo shade he hadn't seen before. When the melody soared into a soaring, defiant arpeggio, the light brightened, and flecks of violet and silver sparked at her temples. She was watching him, but her focus was elsewhere, lost in the sensory input. "What is this?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. "Cello Suite Number 1, Jared replied, his own voice hushed. "By a composer named Bach. He's been dead for about 1,000 years. "The structure is illogical," she observed, though there was no criticism in her tone. "It introduces emotional themes and then abandons them. It contradicts itself." "That's kind of the point," Jared said, sitting in the chair opposite her. "It's not supposed to be a logical proof. It's a feeling." She set the data slate down and gave the music her full attention. She closed her eyes, and the light on her face became a silent, shifting symphony. It danced and flowed with the music, a visual representation of the emotional journey of the piece. She was feeling it, translating the alien chaos of human art into her own unique biological language. For the first time, Jared felt a genuine connection to her, something that had nothing to do with laws or politics. He was sharing a piece of his soul, and she, in her own way, was showing him that she could understand. The music ended, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Mykaela opened her eyes. The patterns on her skin slowly subsided to their gentle, resting glow. "Your culture," she said, her voice filled with a new, uncertain wonder, "is very loud." Jared smiled, a real, unforced smile. "Yeah," he said, "we are." Their fragile peace was shattered 3 days later. They were attending a plenary session of the Citadel Council when Administrator Valerius made his move. He waited for a lull in the proceedings, then rose to his feet, his polished obsidian form commanding the attention of the entire assembly. "A point of cultural privilege," Valerius announced, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "As we celebrate the continued cooperation between our great houses, we are graced by a rare and beautiful event. A new bond between the Sverren and our newest partners, the humans. A bond formed, I am told, through the observance of the most ancient of rites." A murmur went through the assembly. Jared felt a cold dread wash over him. He could feel Mykaela tense beside him. "Such a bond," Valerius continued, his gaze sliding over to them, "is a symbol of the harmony we all strive for, and Sverren tradition provides a beautiful ceremony to affirm such harmony, the trial of synchronization." Ambassador Kalen shot to his feet. "Administrator, that trial is a private, ceremonial matter. It is not a subject for this council." "On the contrary, Ambassador," Valerius said smoothly, "the Citadel Compact, Section 7, Subclause Theta, states that any bond involving a diplomat of primary rank may be publicly affirmed to ensure political stability. This union, so sudden and passionate, has certainly caused ripples. An affirmation would put all minds at ease. I formally invoke the clause." It was a masterstroke of political maneuvering. To refuse the trial would be an admission that their bond was unstable, a confirmation of the very rumors Valerius himself had likely started. To accept was to walk into a public trap designed to humiliate them. The trial was a notoriously difficult test of nonverbal communication and synchronized strategy, built around centuries of Sverren logic. For a Sverren and a human, bonded for less than a week, it would be a public execution. The council's arbiter, a being of pure energy, pulsed slowly. "The clause is valid. The invocation is recognized. The trial of synchronization will be held in 3 rotations in the Chamber of Harmony. Attendance will be mandatory for all council delegates." The arbiter's decree was final. Jared felt the blood drain from his face. Beside him, Mykaela was rigid, her expression unreadable, but he didn't need to see it. Through their bizarre connection, he could feel a wave of cold, controlled terror emanating from her. Valerius had them. He had declared war, and he had chosen a battlefield where they were guaranteed to lose. The Chamber of Harmony was a circular room with a floor made of interactive light panels. It was a Sverren training facility, a place where their innate logic and precision were honed. For the next 3 days, it was Jared and Mykaela's prison. The trial, as she explained it, was a series of complex puzzles that required 2 individuals to move in perfect concert, manipulating the light panels with their feet to form intricate, shifting patterns. One wrong step by either partner would break the pattern and signal failure. It required a level of unity that Sverren couples spent years cultivating. Their first attempts were a catastrophe. Jared's movements were too broad, too human. He anticipated, he improvised, he tried to guess the pattern's next move. Mykaela, in contrast, was perfectly precise, her every step calculated. His chaotic style constantly collided with her rigid logic. "You are not listening to the sequence," she said, her voice tight with frustration after he broke a pattern for the 10th time. The bioluminescent light on her face was a sharp, agitated blue. "I am," he retorted, wiping sweat from his brow. "But it's too slow. By the time we react to one change, the sequence is already 3 moves ahead. We need to anticipate." "Anticipation is a flaw. It is guessing. We must observe, process, and act in perfect unison." "That's not going to work, Mykaela. My brain doesn't operate that way." The argument was a symptom of the real problem. They were trying to force him to be Sverin. On the second day, exhausted and on the verge of admitting defeat, Jared stopped in the middle of a sequence. "Stop," he said, "just stop." She froze, her form poised with frustrated grace. "We are running out of time." "Then we're wasting it by doing this your way," he said, his voice softer now. He walked to the center of the room. "Forget the sequences, just stand opposite me." She hesitated, then complied. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Jared, this is pointless." "Please," he said, "trust me." She closed her eyes. The frantic blue light on her skin softened slightly. "I'm going to take a step," he said. "I'm not going to tell you where, just feel it. Feel me." He took a slow, deliberate step to his left. He focused his intent, his frustration, his desperation, and a flicker of the warmth he felt when he looked at her, and pushed it all toward her. Across the room, she took a perfectly mirrored step to her right. Her eyes snapped open, wide with shock. "How?" "I don't know," he admitted. "The link. Maybe it's not as one way as you thought, or maybe you're learning to read the noise." They spent the rest of the day like that, not practicing the Sverin sequences, but creating their own language. He would lead, and she would follow, her body mirroring his through a combination of instinct and the strange, empathetic current that now flowed between them. They moved from clumsy steps to a fluid, synchronized dance. The space between them, once a gulf of cultural difference, was now charged with an unspoken understanding. Their hands would brush, and a jolt would pass between them. Their eyes would meet, and the rest of the world would fall away. They were no longer just practicing for a trial. They were learning each other. The Chamber of Harmony was packed. Every delegate from the Citadel Council was present, their alien forms creating a silent, judgmental circle around the light-paneled floor. Administrator Valerius stood in a place of prominence, a smug, predatory stillness about him. Jared's heart hammered against his ribs. He glanced at Mykaela. She stood beside him, her back straight, her chin high. The patterns on her skin glowed a calm, steady blue, a placid ocean belying the storm he knew she felt. She met his gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the reassurance he needed. The trial began. A complex, geometric pattern of light bloomed on the floor. Their task was to trace its primary arteries, moving in perfect mirrored opposition. The initial pattern was simple, a standard Sverin diagnostic. They moved through it with a fluid grace that surprised the onlookers. They weren't moving like two individuals. They were moving as one. Jared could feel Mykaela's focus calm through the link, and he let it anchor him. Then the sabotage. The pattern shifted, convulsing into a sequence that was not in the official trial registry. It was faster, chaotic, its logic deliberately fractured. It was a sequence designed to be impossible for two minds to follow. A gasp went through the Sverin delegation. This was a perversion of the trial. Valerius's smile widened. Mykaela faltered, her precise Sverin mind trying to find the logic in the chaos and failing. The pattern was about to collapse. Failure was a heartbeat away. In that split second, Jared made a choice. He abandoned the Sverin method completely. He broke the mirrored formation and moved to her side, his hand hovering just inches from the small of her back. "Don't follow the pattern," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Follow me." He stopped trying to trace the lines. Instead, he began to move through the gaps, treating the chaotic lights not as a path to be followed, but as obstacles to be avoided. His movements were pure human improvisation, a dance of intuition and rhythm. He was no longer solving the puzzle. He was changing the game. For a terrifying second, Mykaela remained frozen, her entire being rebelling against the illogical absurdity of his actions. Then she looked at him. She saw the fierce certainty in his eyes. She felt the unwavering confidence he was projecting through their bond. And she trusted it. She let go of centuries of Sverran tradition and matched his rhythm. They began to move together, a whirlwind of coordinated grace in the heart of the chaos. They weren't tracing the pattern, they were dancing in its negative space. The goal of the trial was to achieve a state of harmony. The rules never explicitly stated how. They were creating their own harmony, one born of human adaptability and Sverran trust. They reached the final control node just as the sequence ended, striking their final pose in perfect, breathtaking unison. Silence. The entire assembly was stunned. They had not merely passed the trial, they had done something far more profound. They had taken a rigid system designed to test logic and conquered it with creativity. Ambassador Kalen was on his feet, a look of utter astonishment on his face. Administrator Valerius's smug expression had dissolved into one of slack-jawed disbelief. The HFY moment was undeniable. In a galaxy built on rules, humanity's greatest strength was its ability to break them beautifully. Back in the apartment, the adrenaline of their victory slowly faded, leaving a profound and unnerving quiet in its place. The chrome surfaces seemed to gleam a little brighter. The sterile air felt charged with potential. They had faced down their political enemies, vindicated their bond in the most public way imaginable, and were now, once again, alone. The public threat was neutralized, leaving only the private, complicated truth between them. Jared watched as Mykaela moved to the apartment's wide viewport, which overlooked the star-dusted expanse of the Citadel's central void. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin were a soft, warm azure, glowing with a gentle, steady light he had come to associate with a deep, contemplative peace. The battle was over, but the war for their own future was just beginning. He crossed the room to stand beside her, the silence stretching between them, no longer awkward, but filled with unspoken weight. "It started because I was lonely," he said, his voice quiet, the words tasting of confession, "and I missed home. I just wanted to make something familiar. That's all it was, Mykaela. That's the whole truth." She turned from the viewport to face him. Her violet eyes, so often guarded and analytical, were open and searching. "I know," she said. "The link, it does not lie. I have always felt the absence of your intent. In the beginning it was confusing, a bond without a declaration. It felt hollow." She took a small step closer, closing the distance between them until he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her. "But then," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "you filled it, not with a lie or a pretense for the public, but with you, with your chaotic music, with your frustrating refusal to accept unreasonable rules, with your trust in me when my own logic failed." She lifted a hand, her slender fingers hesitating for a moment before they gently touched his cheek. Where her skin met his, a soft pulse of blue light flared, warm against his beard. "The bond may have started as an empty space, Jared, but you have filled it. I no longer care how it began." All the fear, all the political pressure, all the frustration of the past weeks melted away, leaving only the profound reality of the woman standing before him. He saw her not as a political prize or an alien roommate, but as Mykaela, the one who felt his anxiety, who shared his triumphs, whose inner light danced to the sound of his soul. "It's not empty for me either," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it to his cheek. The rite of provision was about the act of creation, and standing there, in the chrome heart of a sterile alien world, they were about to create something new. Not for politics, not for tradition, not because of a misunderstanding over a loaf of bread, but for themselves. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The bond, born of flour and yeast, was finally made real with a simple, human choice. 6 months later, the silence in the apartment was the color of life. The sterile chrome and white alloy remained, but they were now the canvas, not the entire picture. A small hydroponic garden flourished in a sunlit corner, spilling the rich green scent of earth basil and rosemary into the recycled air. A soft, woven textile of human origin was draped over one of the severe Sverran chairs. On a side table, a holographic image projector cycled through images. The rugged coast of Jared's Earth home, the precise geometric gardens of the Severan homeworld, a candid shot of the two of them at a recent festival, Mykaela's face alight with a genuine, unguarded smile. Their apartment was no longer a habitation unit. It was a home, a strange and wonderful fusion of two worlds. Mykaela stood before the herb garden, her brow furrowed in concentration. She gently pinched a leaf from the basil plant, following the instructions Jared had given her. She brought it to her nose, inhaling deeply. The sharp, sweet scent was still alien to her, a complex burst of sensory data her mind struggled to categorize. A soft, inquisitive pulse of turquoise light flickered across her cheekbones. "The aromatic compounds are disorderly," she observed, her tone holding the familiar cadence of Severan analysis, but softened now with a note of genuine curiosity. "Yet it is pleasing." Jared came to stand behind her, his hands settling on her waist. He leaned in, his chin resting on her shoulder as he inhaled the scent of the herb with her. "That's the secret of all the best human things, Mykaela. They're a beautiful mess." She leaned back against him, a comfortable, practiced gesture that spoke of countless quiet moments shared in this space. The empathetic link between them was no longer a jarring intrusion, but a constant, gentle hum beneath the surface of their thoughts, a shared current of affection, contentment, and peace. It had deepened, evolved, becoming less a one-way echo and more a silent language all their own. Tonight, their home was to become an embassy. They were hosting their first formal dinner, a small gathering of influential delegates, including the Rigelian hegemon, and in a shocking display of political détente, an attaché from Administrator Valerius's own Tolian office. The invitation had sent ripples through the Citadel's diplomatic circles. The bonded pair, the oddity who had defied tradition, were now setting it. "Are you certain about the main course?" Mykaela asked, turning in his arms to face him. The soft glow on her skin was a steady, warm gold, the color he'd come to associate with her happiness. A roasted avian creature, served in pieces. The inefficiency is considerable. Jared smiled, tracing the glowing pattern at her temple with his thumb. "It's called chicken, and it's not about efficiency. It's about sharing, passing platters, talking, making a bit of a mess. It forces people to interact." "A forced interaction protocol centered on dismembered poultry," she mused, but the corner of her lip tilted up. "Your culture continues to be a fascinating study in structured chaos." The evening was exactly that. The guests arrived to an environment that surpassed their expectations. Instead of the cold, silent formality of a Severan gathering, they were met with the warm, complex harmonies of human jazz music. Instead of being served individual, sterile nutrient portions, they were seated at a long table laden with shared platters of roasted chicken, garlic-scented vegetables, and a fresh, crusty loaf of bread, which Jared had placed in the center of the table with a knowing look at Mykaela. At first, the aliens were hesitant, their movements stiff and uncertain, but Jared and Mykaela moved among them with an easy grace, encouraging them, showing them. The simple, human act of passing a bowl of food from one being to another broke down barriers that years of treaty negotiations could not. Soon, the room was filled with an unprecedented sound, the low murmur of genuine, relaxed conversation. Jared watched from the edge of the room as Mykaela engaged the Rigelian hegemon, a being who usually communicated only through formal edicts. She was explaining the concept of seasoning, and as she spoke with animated grace, the light on her skin shimmered with flecks of silver and green. The hegemon, to everyone's astonishment, emitted a series of low, bubbling sounds that was its species equivalent of laughter. Across the room, Mykaela's gaze found his. In that moment, the noise of the party faded to nothing. The link between them hummed with a sudden powerful clarity. She sent him a wave of pure, unadulterated joy, mingled with a deep and abiding love that still sometimes took his breath away. He sent back his own pride, his own love, his own sense of wonder that this incredible life was theirs. It was a full conversation, held in a single silent glance. Later, after the last guest had departed, leaving a trail of compliments on the success of their unconventional diplomatic model, they stood together in the comfortable clutter of their kitchen. Jared was rinsing plates, and Mykaela was beside him, carefully drying a wine glass with a cloth, a simple domestic act she had insisted on learning. "You know," Jared said, his voice low in the quiet of the apartment, "I never thought I'd feel at home here. Not really." Mykaela set the glass down and turned to him, her hands still warm from the water. She reached up and cupped his jaw, her touch infinitely gentle. The patterns on her skin were a soft, steady sapphire, the color of a twilight sky. "The right of provision is not just about the creation of sustenance," she said, her violet eyes holding his. "At its heart, it is about the creation of a home, a place of safety, of sharing, of warmth." Her thumb brushed over his lips. "You were lonely, so you made bread, but what you were truly trying to create was a home here, so far away from your own." Her voice was a soft whisper. "And you did. You just didn't realize you were creating it for two." He leaned down and kissed her. A slow, deep kiss filled with the taste of wine and the easy, certain promise of tomorrow. The bond that had started with a misunderstanding over flour and yeast had been forged in a public trial, but it had been perfected here, in the quiet moments, in the shared language of a home they had built together. A beautiful, chaotic human mess among the silent stars.